Good morning, Brad. This is Anne Green from the PPEF, the Private Physiotherapy Education Fund, and thank you for agreeing to talk about your research with us today, especially as you've been a recipient of funding from PPEF. So first of all, if you'd like to introduce yourself and also tell us a little bit about your research, that would be great.
Sure, thanks for having me. So my name is Brad. I'm a physiotherapist and early career researcher at the University of Essex, and also a research fellow at Queen Mary, University of London. And my research is predominantly in the field of patellofemoral pain, or kneecap pain, as we tend to describe it to keep things simple.
Okay, great. So can you tell us about this particular research question you've been tackling?
Of course, it was a simple one, and it was what is best practice for people with patellofemoral pain?
Okay, and why did you think that was an important question?
So, for a number of reasons, but primarily patellofemoral pain is common. It has a broad incidence of 1 in 10, but it's particularly common in certain groups like military recruits and adolescents, and to a lesser degree, recreational runners. And it typically has a poor prognosis. So we're quite comfortable that it doesn't have a positive natural history. Over 50% of people are still in pain after 5 years of commencing treatment. They are 2 times more likely to go on to develop knee osteoarthritis, and 6 times more likely to be anxious, depressed, or fearful of movement compared to population norms.
Okay, so what did you do?
So we conducted a mixed methods approach. So we wanted the project to reflect all of the components of evidence-informed medicine. So we conducted a systematic review and meta-analysis of all the available randomized controlled trials in the field. And we then synthesized those data with some qualitative data that we collected by interviewing both clinical experts in the field, but also people with a lived experience of receiving care for their patellofemoral pain.
And what were your findings?
So numerous, but I'll try and, as is the way with mixed method studies, but I'll try and keep them succinct. So if we start with the systematic review and meta-analysis, we initially identified 170 appropriate randomized controlled trials, and we then decided to only include those that we determined to be high quality, of high methodological quality, using the Pedro scale. After applying that scale to the 170 trials, we excluded 105 of them, and we were therefore left with 65 trials that we considered to be of an appropriate methodological quality. And from those 65 trials, we broadly identified 6 individual treatments or combinations of treatments that we determined to have either primary or secondary efficacy for patellofemoral pain, so being superior to either placebo, sham, or a wait and see control, or an intervention that was superior to an intervention with primary efficacy. We also identified 3 interventions that we considered to have no additional benefit when added to another intervention, and 2 interventions that we determined to be non-efficacious and perhaps shouldn't be used. Perhaps the most interesting finding was that all of these outcomes can only be considered up to short-term follow-up, so using the Cochrane guidelines up to and including 3-month follow-up. So there's a real dearth of high-quality trials that have adequately tested interventions beyond the short-term follow-up. And on top of that, we also identified 20 different interventions or combinations of interventions that we determined to be inadequately tested. So either because of having an inadequate sample size, which we determined to be under 23 per group, or an inadequate comparison to either a wait and see, a sham, or placebo control. So there were lots of trials, A and B design trials, that were comparing 2 different interventions that didn't have well-established primary efficacy, which we consider to be inappropriate. So a number of trials that only go to short-term follow-up, and a number of trials that we would consider to be inadequately testing interventions. So it tells us that there's a lot of inadequate quality research in the field, and I doubt that's unique to patellofemoral pain. So we then took those 6 efficacious interventions and also the non-efficacious interventions and attempted to synthesize them with the qualitative data that came out of our interviews, both with clinical experts and people with a lived experience. And in order for an intervention to make it into the best practice guide, it needed to have support from all 3 of those data streams, in essence. So that left us with 3 interventions that were supported by meta-analysis, but were also supported by both clinical experts and people with a lived experience. And they are knee-targeted exercise therapy in isolation, foot orthoses, and also a combination of hip and knee targeted exercise therapy. And that's what we're considering to be our core approach for patellofemoral pain. And there's then also 6 additional interventions that we've considered to be the second tier, which we've defined as being to be considered for appropriate clinically reasoned application when the core approach fails. And those interventions are either supported by the meta-analysis component and one of the qualitative streams, or just the 2 qualitative streams.
Right, sounds very thorough and very methodical, and dealing with that nitty-gritty issue that physiotherapy has of multiple modalities when you're trying to identify what is most effective. Okay, so what are next steps?
So the next steps are, we hope that this will lead on to a number of follow-up trials. So we have these interventions that have made it into the best practice guide to short-term follow-up. We now need people to take those interventions and put them into appropriate trials that have adequate follow-up out to 12 months in order to be confirmed as long-term follow-up. A number of the inadequately tested interventions definitely demonstrate some promise, and it would be positive to see those interventions also adequately tested within appropriate randomized controlled trial designs. So that's the sort of the next steps from a research perspective. But most importantly, we're keen to make sure that what we hope is a thorough and impactful piece of research actually sort of makes it into the field. So there are a number of clinical implications for these works that we want to make sure that message is heard loud and clear by clinicians who spend their time predominantly treating people with patellofemoral pain, but also reaching people with patellofemoral pain as well, so that they can have appropriate input into shared decision making around their care. So we're planning a knowledge translation event, which is going to be held at Queen Mary, University of London, on Wednesday, the 7th of September from 5:30 p.m. We would love for clinicians to attend, but we would also love for people with patellofemoral pain or kneecap pain to attend. And we're going to use that evening as an opportunity to share what we found with these important groups. And I think one of the most important findings is that irrespective of what we choose to do, we've got a nice list here of interventions, all of which are better than doing nothing. So in the short term, we've got this long list of interventions that are definitely better than doing nothing. So when we put that together with the clear absence of a positive natural history for patellofemoral pain, one of the strongest messages that comes through, in our opinion, is that when people have patellofemoral pain, they should be offered care. They shouldn't be offered a wait and see approach. We want them to be offered at least one of the interventions on our list, as opposed to watchful waiting, because it's unlikely that that will lead to positive change for them. And we're pretty comfortable now that we've got a decent list of things that are better than doing nothing. So that's the message that we really want to try and get out there, along with the interventions that are on the list, and perhaps the interventions that we maybe shouldn't be using at this stage because of a lack of support.
Great. Okay, so an open invitation to the conference, and I guess people can follow you on Twitter and in other ways to get detailed information. Is that right?
Absolutely. So it's I've currently got it pinned to the top of my Twitter profile, and my handle is nice and straightforward. It's just at Dr. Brad Neal. But also, if you go on our website, which is teampfp.com, and go to the workshops tab on the top, we've also got it linked there as well. It's free to attend, so there's no charge for the event. It's being funded by the University of Essex's Centre for Public and Policy Engagement, so it's free to attend. There's 300 seats, so hopefully space for a large audience. And we're also laying on a little bit of food and drink as well. If the knowledge translation bit doesn't quite excite you enough, there's also going to be a few nibbles and perhaps a nice beer as well, if that floats your boat.
Great. Well, yeah, always seems to work as a motivator. Great. And just finally, how has PPEF helped your research, and how easy did you find the process in engaging with us?
So this is now the third grant that I've had from PPEF. It's my second as PI, and the other grant I had, I was a co-I. The process is very straightforward, and what I've always liked about it is, unlike some other funding streams, applications to PPEF are all related to physiotherapy. So our ideas are being considered amongst physiotherapy research priorities, as opposed to some other funding streams where we're competing with other medical fields, such as medicine, as an example. And the two streams that PPEF offer from a research grant proposal, they're nice sums of money to, and this is what I found most helpful. It buys time, in essence. So for the last 2 years, and because of a COVID-related underspend, PPEF have kindly agreed to extend the grant for another 6 months to continue that time. It means that for the past 2 years and counting, I've had half a day a week funded by the PPEF to allow me to, and my team, of course, this isn't just me, this is a broad team who I will mention later, to at least half a day a week of my time and a smaller amount of other people's time to make sure that this project gets completed. And what it's allowed us to do is, in a 2-year span, we've published 2 manuscripts already. The 2 qualitative manuscripts are published. They're both in Musculoskeletal Science and Practice. The systematic review is under minor revisions with JOSPT. And then the eventual best practice guide, we're probably going to submit to the British Journal of Sports Medicine. So those of you involved in academia in any way, it's not easy to get a peer-reviewed publication over the line, as I'm sure you're aware, and the time that PPEF has allowed for this particular grant, hopefully we're going to have 4 publications out there in the field in a 2-year span, which is no mean feat. And as Anne referred to, it's a thorough project, combing through thousands of systematic search results to identify those 170 trials that we then boiled down, conducting interviews with 18 experts in the field and 13 people with a lived experience. All of these things take a lot of time, and the funded time we've had from PPEF has allowed us to deliver this chunky project on time. I think that's the most important thing to say. But the process is extremely straightforward, and I've always found that the PPEF board to be very responsive to queries, etc. So any sort of budding physiotherapy researchers out there, please make sure you look at the PPEF website and consider applying for the project grants that are there. But also PPEF also offer some smaller streams for individual projects and conference attendance and things like that. So if you're sort of really just starting to dip your toe into the research water, there's some smaller pots of money that you can access there as well.
Great, thank you very much. So any final words from you, Brad? Did you just want to talk about your team?
Yeah, absolutely. A tip of the cap to the wider team involved in this. So Dr. Simon Lack was the other funded grant applicants. So Simon is a senior lecturer at Queen Mary, University of London, amongst other things. Professor Dylan Morrissey, who's the academic lead at Queen Mary, and also Dr. Christian Barton, who's out at La Trobe University in Melbourne, but then also some wonderful master students. Philip Barber handled the patient interviews, and Amy Curran handled the clinician interviews, and they were heavily involved in the analysis of those data as well. And then also Claire Bartholomew, who was an intercalated BSc student with us at Queen Mary, is now a practicing junior doctor, but we managed to bite her with the research bug, and she stayed involved, and Claire's now proving to be a wonderful member of our wider research team. So that's everyone that's been involved in all of the different data streams that are contributing to this project. So tip of the cap to all of my collaborators. And I think I'll finish by saying, please make sure you treat people with PFP. Don't wait and see, offer them some appropriate care.
Great.
Thank you, of course, to you, Anne, and to PPEF for continuing to fund our work.
Okay, thanks. Great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye
Thank
then.
you. You too.